The auction house smelled of hay, manure, and desperation. Daniel Morgan stood at the back of the crowd, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his worn denim jacket, trying to remain inconspicuous among the horse traders and slaughterhouse buyers. He'd never intended to come here today. A wrong turn on a country road, a hastily scrawled sign advertising a livestock auction, and some strange compulsion had led him to this dusty corner of rural Kentucky. The auctioneer's rapid-fire chatter filled the cavernous space as horses were paraded in and out. Young, healthy animals fetched decent prices from riders and breeders. The older ones, the broken ones, they went to the kill buyers for pennies on the pound. "Next lot," the auctioneer called, his voice betraying no emotion. "Number 47. When they led the horse in, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The animal was ancient, his coat dull and patchy, ribs clearly visible beneath stretched skin. One eye was clouded over, and he walked with a pronounced limp, each step seeming to require tremendous effort. The horse's head hung low, ears barely twitching at the commotion around him. "Starting bid at $350, the auctioneer announced, though his tone suggested he knew that was optimistic. "Do I hear $350 for this gelding? Aged, as you can see, but still some meat on them bones." Daniel felt a surge of nausea. He'd grown up around horses on his grandfather's farm in Tennessee, spent his childhood summers learning to ride and care for the gentle giants. He hadn't been around them in years, not since leaving home at 18, determined to make his mark in the city. Now, at 36, with a failed marriage and a struggling carpentry business behind him, Daniel had been drifting, looking for something, anything, to give his life direction again. "200? Do I hear 200? The auctioneer's voice dropped as he scanned the uninterested crowd. A heavy-set man in the front row raised his hand. Daniel recognized him as one of the slaughterhouse representatives who'd been buying the cheapest horses all morning. $200 from Mr. Kelso. Do I hear $250? The horse lifted his head slightly, and for a brief moment, his good eye seemed to find Daniel's across the room. There was something in that gaze, not just pain or fear, but a quiet dignity that struck Daniel like a physical blow. Going once at 200, Daniel's hand shot up before he could stop himself. $300, he called, his voice cracking from disuse. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose. "We have $300 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $350? Mr. Kelso turned, sizing up Daniel with obvious disdain before raising his paddle again. $350 from Mr. Kelso. 400. Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. What was he doing? He lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Louisville. He had no land, no stable, no equipment. He couldn't afford to feed himself properly some months, let alone care for a horse, especially one this broken. $450, Kelso countered, a smirk playing across his lips. $500, Daniel responded, ignoring the voice of reason screaming in his head. Kelso shrugged and turned away. The slaughter value wasn't worth more than that. $500 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the back. Just like that, Daniel owned a horse. The paperwork took only minutes. The old gelding's name was Samson, according to his sparse documentation. 15 years at least, possibly older. No registration papers, no health records beyond basic vaccinations. Previous owner had fallen on hard times, couldn't afford to keep him. The usual story. "What are you going to do with him?" asked the auction clerk, not unkindly, as she processed Daniel's payment, nearly emptying his checking account. "Save him," Daniel replied simply, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Outside, Samson stood tethered to a post, head down, seemingly unaware that his fate had just changed. Up close, he looked even worse. Deep scars crisscrossed his flanks, and what Daniel had thought was a dappled coat was actually a patchwork of gray hair and healing wounds. The horse's breathing was labored, each exhale accompanied by a soft wheeze. "Jesus," Daniel muttered, gently placing a hand on the animal's neck. Samson flinched but didn't pull away. "You've made a mistake, friend. The voice came from behind him. Kelso stood there, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. "That nag won't last a month. You've wasted your money." "Maybe," Daniel conceded, continuing to stroke Samson's neck. "But at least he won't die on a slaughterhouse floor." Kelso chuckled. Noble sentiment. Don't see much of that these days. He handed Daniel a business card. "When reality sets in, give me a call. I'll take him off your hands for $200. That's generous, considering." Daniel pocketed the card without responding. As Kelso walked away, he leaned close to Samson's ear. "Don't worry," he whispered. "That's not going to happen." The next challenge was transportation. Daniel hadn't thought that far ahead. His Toyota Corolla wasn't exactly equipped for horse transport. Fortunately, the auction house had connections with local haulers. For another $100, scraping the bottom of his savings account, he arranged for Samson to be delivered to Willow Creek Stables, a modest boarding facility he'd frantically Googled while completing the sale. On the drive to meet the hauler at Willow Creek, Daniel called his old friend Mike Sullivan, who had taken over his family's farm equipment business. Their friendship had faded over the years, but Mike had always been decent. "You did what?" Mike exclaimed after Daniel explained the situation. "I bought a horse," Daniel repeated. "An old one, in bad shape. I need a place to keep him while I figure things out." "Have you lost your mind? You don't know the first thing about caring for a horse anymore, especially not a rescue case. I grew up around them, same as you." "That was 20 years ago, Dan, and your grandfather did all the real work." Daniel sighed. "I know it sounds crazy, because it is crazy. Probably. But I couldn't let them kill him, Mike. You should see him. Something about his eyes." There was a long pause on the line. "Fine," Mike finally said. "I've got that old pasture behind the shop. There's a lean-to shelter. It's not much, but it might work temporarily. You'll need to buy feed. Arrange for a vet." "Thank you," Daniel interrupted, relief washing over him. "I'll figure it out. I promise." "You always were a soft touch for lost causes," Mike grumbled, but there was affection in his voice. "Just like your grandfather." As Daniel pulled into Willow Creek Stables to redirect the hauler to Mike's property, he wondered if this impulsive decision was the worst he'd ever made or somehow, against all logic, exactly what he needed. Either way, there was no turning back now. He had committed himself to saving Samson, this broken, battered old horse that the world had discarded. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly suspect, was that Samson would end up saving him in return, and that the mysterious scars and strange behaviors were just the first clues to a secret that would change both their lives forever. Mike's property turned out to be a blessing. The 5-acre pasture behind his farm equipment shop had been unused for years, but the fencing was mostly intact, and the lean-to, while rustic, offered adequate shelter. By the time Daniel arrived, Mike had already cleared out old equipment and laid fresh straw in the covered area. "I called Dr. Hayes," Mike said as they watched the hauler's trailer rumble up the gravel drive. "She's the best large animal vet in the county. Said she can come by tomorrow morning." Daniel nodded, grateful but distracted. His stomach churned with anxiety as the hauler lowered the ramp. What if Samson couldn't even walk off the trailer? What if he'd made everything worse by moving the animal? What if... His thoughts scattered as Samson appeared at the trailer opening. The horse hesitated, sniffing the air cautiously. His good eye swept the unfamiliar surroundings, widening slightly at the sight of open grass. With surprising steadiness, he navigated the ramp and took a few tentative steps onto the property. "Christ," Mike muttered, getting his first look at the animal. "You weren't exaggerating." "I know he looks rough," Daniel began defensively. "Rough? Dan, he looks half dead. What were you thinking?" Daniel had no answer. He thanked and paid the hauler, who departed with a skeptical glance at Samson, clearly sharing Mike's assessment. "He needs water," Daniel said, pushing aside his doubts. "And feed. I bought some senior horse feed on the way here, but I don't know if it's the right kind." Mike sighed. "I've got an old water trough in the storage shed. Let's get that set up first." They worked in companionable silence, filling the trough with clean water and arranging a feeding station in the lean-to. Samson observed their efforts from a distance, still standing where they'd left him, as if uncertain of his freedom to move. "He's probably dehydrated," Mike said. "Try leading him to the water." Daniel approached Samson slowly, speaking in low, gentle tones. "Hey, buddy, let's get you a drink, okay?" He reached for the lead rope still attached to the horse's halter, but before he could grasp it, Samson turned and walked directly to the water trough. The two men exchanged surprised glances. "Smart old boy," Mike commented. "Yeah," Daniel murmured, watching as Samson drank deeply. There was something unsettling about the deliberate way the horse had moved, almost as if he'd understood their conversation. After Samson had his fill of water, Daniel led him to the lean-to and offered a small portion of feed, which the horse sniffed cautiously before eating with measured bites. "I should stay with him tonight," Daniel said, realizing he hadn't thought about his own accommodations. "Don't be ridiculous. There's the pull-out couch in my office. You can sleep there and check on him in the morning. Dr. Hayes will be here at 7. Daniel wanted to argue, but knew Mike was right. Exhaustion was setting in after the day's events. He gave Samson a final pat, promising to return early, and followed Mike to the shop's small attached office. Sleep didn't come easily. Daniel's mind raced with practical concerns, the cost of veterinary care, feed, potential medications, and deeper questions about his impulsive decision. What was he doing? His life was already unsettled enough after the divorce and his business struggles. Adding a severely neglected horse to the mix seemed like madness. Yet whenever he closed his eyes, he saw Samson's gaze meeting his across the auction house, that look of quiet dignity amidst suffering. There had been something in that connection, something that had compelled him to act against all reason. Daniel rose before dawn, his back stiff from the uncomfortable couch. He crept outside, eager to check on Samson. To his relief, the horse was standing under the lean-to, his breathing steady. When Daniel approached, Samson lifted his head, ears pricked forward in what seemed like recognition. "Morning," Daniel said softly, reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. "How are you feeling today?" Samson leaned slightly into his touch, which Daniel took as a positive sign. Dr. Hayes arrived precisely at 7, her truck kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop. She was younger than Daniel had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with copper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Daniel," she said, extending a hand. "Mike filled me in. Said you rescued this guy from the auction block yesterday?" "That's right. His name is Samson." Dr. Hayes smiled. "Biblical strength. Let's see if he lives up to it." Her examination was thorough and gentle. She checked Samson's vital signs, his teeth, his eyes, ran expert hands along his legs and back, and drew blood for testing. Throughout the process, she maintained a running commentary. "Definitely older than 15. I'd put him closer to 20, maybe more. Malnourished, but that's obvious. The eye's got a cataract, but the other one looks healthy. Respiratory issue. Hearing some congestion. Could be a chronic condition or just a result of poor care." She paused, examining one of the scars on his flank. "These are unusual." "The scars?" Daniel asked. "Some of them, yes. These here," she traced a pattern on Samson's side, "are too precise to be accidental. Almost surgical." She moved to his neck, parting the coarse hair. "And here, there's evidence of some kind of device having been attached. See these marks? Like something was strapped to him." Daniel peered at the spot she indicated. The skin showed small, round scars in a regular pattern. "What would cause that?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I've seen similar marks on research animals, but..." She shook her head. "That wouldn't make sense here." She continued her examination, pausing again at Samson's left hip. "There's a brand here, but it's been deliberately obscured. Someone tried to hide it." "Why would they do that?" "Good question. Usually a brand identifies ownership. Hiding it suggests someone didn't want this horse traced back to them." She straightened up. "I'll run these blood samples. Check for any immediate concerns. In the meantime, he needs a specialized feeding regimen to address the malnutrition. I'll write it up for you." As she prepared to leave, Dr. Hayes gave Daniel a searching look. "You know, rehabilitation cases like this are expensive and time-consuming, and there's no guarantee he'll ever be sound enough to ride, if that's what you're hoping." "I'm not looking to ride him," Daniel said. "I just want to give him a decent life for whatever time he has left." She smiled. "Good answer. I'll call you when I have the blood results." After she'd gone, Daniel spent the morning with Samson, carefully following the feeding instructions Dr. Hayes had left. Mike stopped by during his lunch break, bringing sandwiches and more horse supplies he'd picked up in town. "You're going to need these," he said, handing over brushes, hoof picks, and basic grooming tools. "Start handling him regularly. It'll help build trust." Daniel accepted the items gratefully. "Mike, about the boarding." Mike waved him off. "Don't worry about it for now. That pasture was just sitting empty anyway, but you'll need to figure out a long-term plan." That afternoon, Daniel began gentle grooming sessions with Samson. The horse stood patiently as Daniel worked through the tangles in his mane and tail, carefully avoiding sensitive areas. With each stroke of the brush, more dust and dead hair came away, gradually revealing a coat that, while still dull, showed hints of a deep liver chestnut color beneath the gray. "You're going to be handsome once we get you cleaned up," Daniel murmured. As he worked, he noticed more unusual markings, a line of small puncture scars along Samson's spine, barely visible through his coat, and an odd square patch of white hair on his chest that didn't match the natural pattern of a blaze or star. There was something increasingly unsettling about these discoveries. They spoke of deliberate human intervention, not mere neglect or accidental injury. What had Samson been through? And why did Daniel feel with growing certainty that there was more to this horse than met the eye? That night, as Daniel prepared to leave, Samson followed him to the gate, standing close as if reluctant to see him go. On impulse, Daniel took his phone out and snapped a photo of the horse's profile, capturing the intelligent gaze of his good eye. It wasn't until later, looking at the picture on his phone, that Daniel noticed something odd, a faint metallic gleam visible in Samson's obscured brand, something that hadn't been apparent to the naked eye. He zoomed in, trying to make sense of the shape, but the image became too pixelated. Whatever secrets Samson carried, they weren't giving themselves up easily. But Daniel was determined to uncover them, one brushstroke at a time. 3 weeks passed, each day bringing subtle changes to Samson. His coat began to shine, his frame gradually filling out with careful feeding. The wheezing that had accompanied his breathing diminished, though didn't disappear entirely. He grew more responsive to Daniel's presence, nickering softly when he arrived each morning and following him around the pasture with increasing strength in his step. Dr. Hayes had returned twice more, expressing cautious optimism about Samson's progress. The blood tests had revealed anemia and elevated liver enzymes, but nothing immediately life-threatening. She'd prescribed supplements and a specialized diet, which Daniel followed with meticulous care. "You've got a natural touch with him," she remarked during her latest visit, watching Daniel clean Samson's hooves, a task the horse now permitted without resistance. "He trusts you." "I think he's just grateful someone's feeding him regularly," Daniel replied, though he secretly treasured the connection that was forming between them. "It's more than that. Horses who've suffered abuse often take much longer to rebuild trust. There's something special about your bond." Daniel had felt it too, though he was hesitant to articulate it. Samson seemed to anticipate his needs sometimes, moving to make a task easier before Daniel had even signaled his intentions. Once, when Daniel had stumbled in the pasture, Samson had sidled up beside him, offering his solid presence as support. These moments could be explained away as coincidence or projection, yet they accumulated into something that felt meaningful. More puzzling were the discoveries Daniel continued to make about Samson's body. The obscured brand on his hip had become his particular obsession. Using a combination of careful grooming and photography, he'd begun to make out what looked like numbers and letters beneath the deliberate scarring. ND785. Could be a registration code of some kind, Mike suggested when Daniel showed him. Or maybe a military designation, though I've never seen one like that on a horse. Military, Daniel echoed, surprised. Sure, Army used to have mounted units. Some special forces still use horses in rough terrain, though this old boy doesn't look like he was charging into battle anytime recently. The thought lingered with Daniel. That evening, he sat in Mike's office, using the computer to search for information about military horses and identification systems. Most of what he found was historical, nothing that matched the ND 785 pattern. He broadened his search to research facilities, remembering Dr. Hayes's comment about the marks resembling those on research animals. Hours of searching yielded little concrete information, though he did find mentions of various government-funded studies on equine physiology in the 1980s and 90s. One program in particular caught his attention, the Neural Development Initiative, which had conducted research on cognitive function and sensory perception in large mammals. The program had been discontinued in 2001, with most of its records classified. Neural Development, ND. Could that be the meaning behind the first part of Samson's brand? Daniel's research was interrupted by his phone ringing. It was Dr. Hayes. I've been looking more closely at Samson's blood work, she said without preamble. There's something unusual I can't quite place. Markers I'm not familiar with. I sent samples to a colleague who specializes in equine biochemistry. Is it dangerous? Daniel asked, immediately concerned. I don't think so. His clinical signs are all improving. It's just odd. Almost like he's been exposed to some kind of experimental treatment. She paused. Have you made any progress with identifying his background? Daniel shared what little he'd uncovered about the Neural Development Initiative. That might explain a few things, she said thoughtfully. Look, I don't want to alarm you, but if Samson was involved in government research, there could be complications regarding his ownership. He's mine, Daniel said firmly. I have the bill of sale. I know. Just be careful about broadcasting your investigations too widely. Some of these programs can be sensitive about their subjects, even years later. The warning left Daniel uneasy. After hanging up, he continued his search with renewed determination, but with more caution about the digital fingerprints he might be leaving. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the pasture to find Samson standing motionless in the center of the field, head raised and ears pricked forward, focused intently on something in the distance. Daniel followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the empty country road and fields beyond. What is it, boy? He asked, approaching slowly. Samson didn't acknowledge him, continuing to stare at the empty horizon. Then, without warning, the horse wheeled around and trotted to the far corner of the pasture, where he began pawing at the ground with surprising vigor. Curious, Daniel followed. Samson was digging determinedly at a spot near the fence line, his hoof scraping away dirt to reveal something partially buried. Daniel knelt to investigate and found himself looking at a small metal box, its surface corroded with age. What the hell, he muttered, carefully extracting it from the soil. The box was locked, but years of exposure had weakened the mechanism. With some effort, Daniel managed to pry it open. Inside was a collection of weathered papers, what appeared to be research notes, and a small device that resembled a flash drive. The papers were mostly illegible, damaged by moisture and time. But Daniel could make out a few phrases. Subject demonstrates unprecedented cognitive response and neural pathway enhancement successful beyond projected outcomes. One page contained a list of test subjects identified by code, ND 781, ND 782, and so on, through ND 790. Samson's code, ND 785, was circled. Daniel looked up at the horse, who had stopped digging and was watching him with that unnervingly intelligent gaze. "How did you know this was here?" he whispered. Samson nickered softly, then returned to grazing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That night, after ensuring Samson was comfortable for the evening, Daniel took the flash drive to Mike's office. The device was old, but fortunately, Mike's computer had a compatible port. Most of the files were corrupted, but one document opened, a research summary dated January 1998. Project Pegasus Final Assessment, Daniel read aloud. Subjects have demonstrated significant enhancement in cognitive processing, memory retention, and sensory perception following neural pathway modification. Most promising results observed in subjects ND785 and ND788, who displayed capabilities approaching human-equivalent problem-solving capacity. Daniel's heart raced as he continued reading. The document detailed experiments involving cranial implant technology and biochemical enhancement protocols designed to augment equine intelligence. The goal appeared to be the development of autonomous field operatives capable of navigating complex environments without human guidance. In simpler terms, they were trying to create super-intelligent horses. The document ended with a recommendation to advance the most successful subjects, including ND785 Samson, to Phase 2 integration testing at a facility called Black Ridge. Daniel sat back, his mind reeling. If this information was accurate, Samson wasn't just any horse. He had been deliberately enhanced, his brain altered to function at a level approaching human cognition. It seemed impossible, the stuff of science fiction, yet it would explain the strange behaviors Daniel had observed, the way Samson seemed to understand conversations, his uncanny awareness, how quickly he adapted to new situations. It would also explain why someone had gone to such lengths to obscure his identity before sending him to auction. A horse like Samson would be valuable, or dangerous, to certain people. Jesus, Samson, Daniel murmured. What did they do to you? The next morning, Daniel arrived at the pasture earlier than usual, his mind still processing the revelations of the previous night. Samson greeted him at the gate, and Daniel found himself studying the horse with new eyes, looking for signs of the extraordinary intelligence suggested by the documents. "Can you understand me?" he asked directly, feeling slightly foolish. "I mean, really understand?" Samson gazed at him steadily, then deliberately bobbed his head in what could only be interpreted as a nod. Daniel's breath caught. "Stamp your front hoof 3 times if you understand what I'm saying." The horse held his gaze for a long moment, then precisely stamped his hoof against the ground. 1, 2, 3 times. "Holy shit," Daniel whispered. 1,000 questions flooded his mind. How much did Samson comprehend? Did he have memories of the experiments? Why had he ended up at auction? But before he could figure out how to communicate these complex inquiries, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. A black SUV with tinted windows was rolling slowly down the country road, stopping just short of Mike's property. Daniel felt a prickle of unease, remembering Dr. Hayes' warning about sensitive government programs. He retreated into the lean-to, pulling Samson with him, and watched as 2 men in dark suits emerged from the vehicle. They stood at the edge of the road, surveying the property with an air of calculated assessment. After several minutes, they returned to their SUV and drove away. But the message was clear. Someone was looking for something, or someone. Daniel waited until the vehicle was well out of sight before turning back to Samson, who had remained unusually still throughout the encounter. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" he asked quietly. Samson's good eye blinked once, slowly, and Daniel knew with sudden certainty that his life had just become considerably more complicated. Daniel watched the road anxiously for the rest of the day, but the black SUV didn't return. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Twice he caught Samson staring intently at the tree line bordering the eastern edge of the property, ears forward, nostrils flared, sensing something Daniel couldn't perceive. Mike noticed Daniel's unease when he stopped by that afternoon. "You look like you're expecting the tax man," he joked, then grew serious when Daniel didn't smile. "What's going on?" Daniel hesitated. Mike had been nothing but supportive, but the documents he'd found painted a picture so fantastical that saying it aloud seemed ridiculous. Would Mike even believe him? "I found something," he finally said, deciding to start with the concrete evidence. Buried at the edge of the pasture, it was research documents about Samson. Mike raised an eyebrow. "Research documents? What kind of research?" "It's complicated, and honestly, a bit hard to believe." Daniel took a deep breath. "According to these papers, Samson was part of some kind of government program to enhance horse intelligence. They called it Project Pegasus. To his credit, Mike didn't laugh. He glanced at Samson, who was grazing nearby, then back at Daniel. "And you believe this? I know how it sounds, but there's evidence. The unusual scars Dr. Hayes pointed out, the obscured brand that matches codes in the documents. And there's something else." Daniel lowered his voice. "I think Samson actually understands us, not just in the way most horses pick up on commands, but really comprehends language." Now Mike looked concerned. "Dan, I know you've gotten attached to him, but—" "It's not projection," Daniel insisted. "Watch." He turned to Samson. "Samson, can you come here, please?" The horse lifted his head, regarded them for a moment, then walked deliberately to where they stood. "That's just good training," Mike said skeptically. "Samson, show Mike how many times I filled your water trough this morning." The horse pawed the ground twice, precise and deliberate. "Coincidence," Mike muttered, but he sounded less certain. "Samson, if you can really understand me, go to the gate and then come back and touch Mike's left shoulder with your nose." Even Daniel held his breath as Samson stood motionless for a moment. Then, with methodical purpose, the horse walked to the gate, turned, and returned to touch his muzzle lightly against Mike's left shoulder. Mike's face drained of color. That's not normal." "No," Daniel agreed quietly. "It's not. So these people, the ones who did this to him, they're looking for him now?" "I think so. There was a black SUV earlier today. 2 men in suits watching the property." Mike ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Dan, what have you gotten yourself into?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I can't just hand him over. You've seen how he was treated. Who knows what they'd do to him if they got him back?" Mike paced a few steps, visibly processing. "Okay, first things first. If people are watching, we need to move him. I've got a buddy with a farm about 40 miles from here. Very private, end of a long dirt road. We could take Samson there tonight." Relief flooded through Daniel. "You believe me then?" "I believe something weird is going on, and I believe you're in over your head." Mike gave him a grim smile. "What are friends for if not helping you hide possibly illegal government experiments?" They spent the next hour making hurried preparations. Mike called his friend, explaining that they needed emergency boarding for a rescue horse, careful to omit the more extraordinary details. Daniel gathered Samson's feed, medications, and the few pieces of equipment he'd accumulated. By dusk, they were ready. Mike had a horse trailer he used occasionally for his farm equipment business. They backed it up to the pasture gate, and Daniel led Samson toward it. The horse balked initially, planting his feet and refusing to move. "It's okay," Daniel reassured him. "We're trying to keep you safe." Samson's ears flicked back and forth, his good eye rolling to take in the surroundings. Then, apparently having made some internal calculation, he stepped forward and walked calmly into the trailer. They drove through the gathering darkness, taking back roads to avoid main highways. Daniel sat tensely in the passenger seat, checking the side mirrors repeatedly for signs of pursuit. "You're making me nervous," Mike said after the 10th such check. "Sorry. I can't help thinking this is exactly what they'd expect us to do." "Maybe, but we don't have many options." The farm belonged to Craig Jensen, a taciturn man in his 60s who asked few questions when they arrived. He showed them to a small barn at the far end of his property, well screened from the road by a stand of oak trees. "Nobody comes back here," he assured them. "You can keep him as long as you need." After settling Samson in a clean stall with fresh water and hay, Daniel and Mike drove back to town separately, agreeing it would be less conspicuous. Daniel would return to his apartment, gather some essentials, and come back to stay at Craig's place the following day. Mike would keep an eye on his own property, alert for any suspicious activity. Daniel slept poorly that night, his dreams filled with shadowy figures and the sound of hoofbeats. He woke before dawn, packed a duffel bag with clothes and toiletries, and left a vague message for his few carpentry clients that he'd be away on a family emergency. By mid-morning, He was back on the road to Craig's farm. The countryside seemed peaceful in the light of day, rolling hills dotted with cattle and the occasional farmhouse. Daniel felt his tension ease slightly as he turned onto the long gravel drive leading to Craig's property. Maybe they had overreacted. Maybe the men in the SUV had been real estate agents or lost tourists. These comforting thoughts evaporated as he rounded the final bend and saw Craig standing in the yard, arguing with two people, a man and a woman, both in crisp dark suits that seemed out of place in the rural setting. Daniel slowed his car, heart pounding, but it was too late to turn around without being noticed. Craig spotted him and waved him forward, his expression tight. With no other option, Daniel parked and approached the group, trying to project a casual demeanor he didn't feel. "Daniel," Craig called, "these folks are from the Department of Agriculture. They're conducting a survey of local livestock." The warning in his tone was subtle but clear. These people had not identified themselves as being from the Department of Agriculture, or Craig wouldn't be emphasizing it so deliberately. "Ah, I see," Daniel replied, extending his hand to the pair. "Daniel Morgan." The woman shook his hand with a firm grip. "Sarah Reed. This is my colleague James Novak. We're particularly interested in rescue animals in the region. Mr. Jensen mentioned you recently acquired a horse." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were sharp and assessing. Novak remained silent, his gaze drifting past Daniel toward the barn where Samson was housed. "That's right," Daniel said carefully. "An old gelding from a local auction. Nothing special." "We'd like to see him if you don't mind," Reed said. "It's for our records. He's resting right now. The move was stressful for him." "This won't take long." Novak spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Before Daniel could respond, Craig intervened. "As I was telling you folks, I've got paperwork for all animals on my property. Health certificates, vaccination records, the works. I'd be happy to show you those first." It was a transparent delay tactic, but it bought Daniel a moment to think. These people were clearly not from the Department of Agriculture. Had they followed him here? Or had they somehow traced Samson independently? "Of course," Reed said smoothly. "We'd appreciate seeing those records." As Craig led them toward the main house, he shot Daniel a meaningful look over his shoulder. The message was clear: do something. Daniel waited until they were out of sight, then sprinted to the barn. Samson was standing alert in his stall, head high, ears pricked toward the door as if he'd been expecting Daniel. "We've got to move," Daniel said breathlessly. "They found us." He quickly slipped a halter over Samson's head and attached a lead rope. There was no time for a proper trailer loading. They would have to go on foot. The back of Craig's property bordered a national forest, miles of rugged terrain where they might be able to lose themselves, at least temporarily. Daniel led Samson out the back door of the barn, staying close to the tree line to remain out of sight from the house. The horse moved willingly, his stride stronger and more confident than when Daniel had first acquired him. They slipped into the forest just as voices became audible from the direction of the main yard. The conversation with Craig had concluded. The forest was dense, sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. Daniel had no clear plan beyond putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. He hoped the thick undergrowth would make it difficult to track them, but he knew they were leaving an obvious trail. A man and a horse couldn't move through woodland without disturbing the environment. After about 20 minutes of steady progress, they reached a small stream. Daniel paused, considering their options. Following the water might mask their trail, but it also led back toward more populated areas. Crossing it would mean continuing deeper into the wilderness. Samson made the decision for him, stepping deliberately into the stream and beginning to walk upstream, away from civilization. Daniel followed, grateful for the horse's sure-footedness on the slippery stones. They had gone perhaps a quarter mile when Samson suddenly stopped, head raised, nostrils flared. A moment later, Daniel heard it too. Voices in the distance, coming from the direction they had fled. Reed and Novak had discovered their absence and were in pursuit, possibly with others. Daniel felt a surge of panic. They were being hunted in unfamiliar territory, with limited supplies and nowhere to go. The gravity of his situation hit him all at once. He was now a fugitive, running from what appeared to be government agents, all for the sake of a horse he'd owned for less than a month. Yet looking at Samson, standing alert beside him, his intelligent eye fixed on Daniel's face, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Whatever had been done to this animal, whatever secrets he carried, he deserved better than to be treated as property to be reclaimed. "We'll figure this out," Daniel whispered, as much to reassure himself as the horse. Samson nudged his shoulder gently, then turned and continued upstream with quiet determination. Daniel followed, placing his trust in the horse's instincts and whatever enhanced perception he might possess. Behind them, the voices grew louder, echoing through the trees. The pursuit had begun in earnest. The stream grew wider and faster as they continued upstream, its banks steepening until Daniel and Samson were forced to leave the water and continue on land. The forest had thickened, towering oak and maple trees creating a dense canopy that dimmed the afternoon light. Daniel had no clear sense of direction anymore, simply following Samson's lead while straining to listen for sounds of pursuit. The voices had faded, but that didn't mean they were safe. Daniel's phone had no signal here in the wilderness, and even if it had, he wasn't sure who he could call. The authorities? What would he tell them? That he was fleeing government agents who wanted to reclaim a super-intelligent horse. "We need to find shelter before nightfall," he told Samson, who flickered an ear back in apparent acknowledgement. The temperature was dropping, and Daniel was woefully unprepared for a night in the forest. He had no food, no water beyond what they could find, not even a jacket. Samson, at least, had his natural coat for warmth, but Daniel was already shivering in his thin cotton shirt. Just as despair threatened to overtake him, Samson abruptly changed direction, heading up a steep incline with purposeful strides. Daniel struggled to keep up, grabbing at tree trunks and roots to steady himself on the slippery ground. When they crested the ridge, he saw what had drawn Samson's attention. Nestled among the trees about 50 yards ahead was a small cabin. It appeared abandoned, its wooden walls weathered gray with age, the small porch sagging slightly on one side. Windows dark and shuttered, chimney cold, but a roof and walls, protection from the elements. "Good boy," Daniel breathed, patting Samson's neck. "How did you know this was here?" The horse simply continued forward, approaching the cabin with caution. Daniel followed, alert for signs of habitation despite the structure's neglected appearance. They circled the building once. No vehicles, no fresh footprints, no smoke from the chimney, just the musty scent of disuse. The door was locked, but a window at the back had been broken, its jagged edges softened by weather and time. Daniel cleared the remaining glass, then hoisted himself through the opening, dropping quietly onto a wooden floor inside. He made his way to the front door and unbolted it from within, allowing Samson to enter. The cabin's interior was Spartan but intact. A single room with a small cast-iron stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot pushed against the far wall. A thick layer of dust covered everything, disturbed now by Daniel's footprints and Samson's hoofprints on the plank floor. "Looks like a hunting cabin," Daniel murmured, taking inventory of their surroundings. "Probably hasn't been used since last season." He found a lantern and matches on a shelf, and to his relief, the lantern still contained oil. The warm glow illuminated the space, revealing a few additional resources: a stack of firewood beside the stove, some canned goods in a small cupboard, a canteen, and most welcome of all, a couple of rough woolen blankets folded at the foot of the cot. It wasn't much, but it would get them through the night. Daniel set about making the space habitable, starting a small fire in the stove for warmth and clearing cobwebs from the corners. Samson stood patiently near the door, his large frame taking up a significant portion of the small room, but seeming oddly at home within the human dwelling. As darkness fell outside, Daniel realized they'd been fortunate. The cabin's location, tucked among the trees on the ridge, made it difficult to spot from below. Unless their pursuers came directly up the same path, they might pass by without noticing the structure. He shared a meal of cold beans with Samson, scraping the contents of a can into his palm for the horse to lip up delicately. It wasn't proper equine nutrition, but it was better than nothing. Water was a more pressing concern. The canteen held only enough for Daniel, and Samson would need much more. "First light. We'll find a stream," Daniel promised, stroking the horse's neck. "Get some rest." Samson snorted softly and lowered himself to the floor with surprising grace for an animal his size, folding his legs beneath him. Daniel stretched out on the cot, pulling the musty blankets around himself. But sleep eluded him. His mind raced with questions and fears. What would happen when they were found? Would he face criminal charges for essentially stealing government property? And what about Samson? Would they take him back to some laboratory, continue whatever experiments they had been conducting? "I won't let them take you," he whispered into the darkness. Samson's rhythmic breathing was his only response, the horse apparently having no trouble sleeping despite their precarious situation. Daniel must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing he knew, early morning light was filtering through the cabin's dusty windows, and Samson was on his feet, head raised alertly, ears pricked forward. A moment later, Daniel heard what had disturbed him, the sound of an engine, some distance away but approaching. He moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. Through the trees he could make out a flash of metal, a vehicle moving along a logging road that Daniel hadn't realized was there. It was too far away to identify, but the mere presence of any motorized transport in this remote area was concerning. "We need to move," he told Samson, hastily gathering what supplies he could. The canteen, matches, a small knife he'd found in a drawer. He stuffed these into his pockets, then led Samson quietly out of the cabin. They moved away from the direction of the vehicle, staying within the tree line, Daniel conscious of the noise they were making despite their best efforts at stealth. Samson seemed to understand the need for quiet, placing his hooves carefully, avoiding branches that might snap. They had gone perhaps half a mile when a different sound stopped them in their tracks, the distant but distinctive baying of dogs. "They've brought trackers," Daniel said grimly. Samson's sides heaved with a deep breath, his good eye rolling to look at Daniel with what seemed like concern. Then he nudged Daniel's chest firmly, pushing him toward a fallen log. "What is it?" Daniel asked, confused. Samson repeated the gesture, more insistently. It took Daniel a moment to understand. "You want me to hide? And what about you?" Samson tossed his head, then deliberately pawed the ground 3 times, the signal they had established for yes. "I'm not leaving you," Daniel protested. The horse snorted, pawing again with unmistakable emphasis, then turned his head in the direction of the approaching dogs. His meaning was clear. He would lead them away while Daniel concealed himself. "That's insane," Daniel argued. "They'll catch you." Samson regarded him steadily, then lowered his head to nudge the pocket where Daniel had stashed the documents from the metal box, the evidence of Project Pegasus. You want me to take this to someone? To expose what they did?" Again, that deliberate pawing. Yes, Daniel felt tears stinging his eyes, the selflessness of the gesture, the clear intelligence behind it. It was overwhelming. He wrapped his arms around Samson's neck, burying his face in the coarse mane. "I'll come back for you," he promised. "I'll find a way to help you." Samson huffed softly, then pulled away, giving Daniel one last meaningful look before turning and trotting deliberately in the opposite direction from their hiding place, making far more noise than before, intentionally drawing attention. With a heavy heart, Daniel crawled beneath the fallen log, pulling branches and leaves over himself for concealment. From his hiding spot, he could see Samson disappear among the trees, the sound of his hoofbeats fading. The waiting was excruciating. The dogs' baying grew louder, then suddenly more excited. They had picked up Samson's fresh trail. Human voices followed, too distant to make out words, but clear enough to confirm that multiple pursuers were closing in. Daniel remained motionless, scarcely breathing, as the search party passed within 30 yards of his position, following Samson's path. He caught glimpses of dark uniforms, heard the crackle of radios, saw the flash of what might have been weapons, This was no ordinary animal control operation. When they had passed, Daniel waited another agonizing 10 minutes before cautiously emerging from his hiding place. The forest had fallen eerily silent. Even the birds seemed to have been frightened into stillness by the human intrusion. He needed to find his way back to civilization, to someone who could help. But who? The local authorities were unlikely to believe his story, and might even turn him over to the people pursuing them. He needed someone with credibility, someone who could verify the truth about Project Pegasus. Dr. Hayes. She had seen the unusual markings on Samson, had noticed the anomalies in his blood work. She had connections in veterinary research circles. If anyone could help authenticate the documents and advocate for Samson, it would be her. With renewed determination, Daniel oriented himself toward what he hoped was north, in the general direction of the town. It would be a long walk, possibly days if he couldn't find a road, but he had no choice. Samson had sacrificed his freedom to give Daniel this chance. He couldn't waste it. He had been walking for perhaps an hour when he heard the sound of running water. Following the noise, he found himself at the edge of a swift-moving river, much larger than the stream they had followed the previous day. It cut across his path like a liquid barrier, too wide and fast to safely cross. Daniel was considering his options when a voice behind him said, "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Morgan." He spun around to find himself facing a woman he'd never seen before. She was in her 40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing not the dark suit he'd expected but practical hiking clothes. Despite her civilian appearance, something in her bearing suggested authority. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, backing toward the river, though he knew he had nowhere to run. "Dr. Eleanor Walsh. I'm a veterinary neurologist. I used to work with Samson." The name triggered a memory. Daniel had seen it on some of the Project Pegasus documents. "You were part of the Neural Development Initiative." She nodded. "I was, though not in the way you might think." She gestured to a fallen tree nearby. "May we sit? It's a long story, and one I think you need to hear." Daniel hesitated, wary of a trap, but something in her direct gaze made him incline his head in cautious agreement. They sat, maintaining a careful distance between them. "First," she said, "you should know that Samson has been recaptured. They're transporting him to a facility about 20 miles from here." Daniel's heart sank. "Is he all right? They won't hurt him?" "He's unharmed, and no, they won't hurt him. Despite what you may have concluded from those fragments of research you found, Project Pegasus wasn't what you think. They were enhancing horse intelligence," Daniel said, "creating some kind of super-smart equines for military applications." Dr. Walsh's lips curved in a sad smile. "That was the official objective, yes, but those of us actually working with the horses had a different agenda entirely. We weren't enhancing their intelligence, Mr. Morgan. We were trying to communicate with it. Intelligence that was already there." Daniel stared at Dr. Walsh, trying to process her words. "What do you mean, intelligence that was already there?" She gazed out at the rushing river, collecting her thoughts. "Humans have a persistent blind spot when it comes to animal cognition. We assume that because other species don't communicate in ways we immediately recognize, they must be operating at a lower level of consciousness." She turned back to him. "But what if that's wrong? What if animals, some animals at least, experience the world with a richness and complexity comparable to our own, just differently? And horses are one of those animals?" "We believe so, yes, particularly certain individuals." She paused. Samson, or ND-785, as he was designated in the program, was exceptional even before we began working with him. He displayed problem-solving abilities, emotional intelligence, and memory capacity far beyond what conventional science attributed to equines. Daniel thought of Samson's behavior over the past weeks, his seemingly intuitive understanding, his responsiveness, his ability to locate the buried box of documents. It had seemed incredible, impossible even. But what if it wasn't enhancement at all? What if it was simply Samson's natural capacity, given the right conditions to express itself? The implants, the surgeries. Those weren't to make him smarter? Dr. Walsh shook her head. They were interfaces, ways for us to measure and eventually communicate with his existing cognitive processes. Think of it like developing a translation tool between two different but equally sophisticated languages. Then why all the secrecy? Why was he abandoned? Because the military funders of the project weren't interested in cross-species communication for its own sake. They wanted weaponization. Horses that could be remotely controlled in combat zones, gather intelligence autonomously, even potentially carry explosive payloads into enemy territory. Her expression hardened. When we refused to shift our research in that direction, funding was cut. The program was officially shut down in 2001. But unofficially? A smaller faction continued, focusing entirely on the weaponization aspects. Most of the original researchers, myself included, were pushed out. We tried to take legal action to protect the horses, but national security classifications made it nearly impossible. She sighed heavily. We thought all the subjects had been euthanized after the program ended. Finding out that Samson survived, it's miraculous, frankly. Daniel felt a chill despite the warm spring air. So the people chasing us, they're from this unofficial continuation? Yes. When you started asking questions, uploading images of Samson's identifying marks, searching for information about the Neural Development Initiative, you triggered alerts. They've been monitoring for any sign of the project subjects for years. But why? It's been over 2 decades. Because Samson carries something invaluable, both the physical neural interfaces and, more importantly, the experience of the original, ethically conducted research. He's living proof of what we discovered. She leaned forward intently. Mr. Morgan, do you understand what I'm saying? Samson remembers everything. The procedures, the communication protocols we developed, the data we collected. It's all there, in his mind. That makes him incredibly dangerous to people who've spent 20 years burying the truth about animal cognition to pursue military applications. Daniel's thoughts raced. If what Dr. Walsh was saying was true, it changed everything. Not just about Samson, but about humanity's relationship with animals broadly. The implications were staggering. How did you find me? He asked, suddenly suspicious again. Are you working with them? No, but I've been watching for the same alert keywords. When they started moving resources to this area, I knew they'd found something, or someone. I've been tracking their movements for days. She produced a small device from her pocket, something like a modified smartphone. This detects the specific frequency of Samson's neural implants. It led me to this general area, and then I spotted you. So they have a similar device? That's how they found us at Craig's farm? Most likely, yes. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing along the riverbank. I need to help him. Where are they taking him? To a temporary research station about 20 miles northeast of here. It's not their permanent facility, just somewhere to evaluate his condition before transport. And you know this how? I still have contacts, people who were part of the original program and have maintained positions within the organization, feeding information to those of us on the outside. She rose as well, her expression earnest. Mr. Morgan, I understand your concern for Samson. I share it. But rushing in without a plan would be disastrous. These people have government backing, advanced technology, and armed security. So what do you suggest? Come with me. There are others from the original research team who've been working for years to expose the truth about Project Pegasus. With your testimony and the documents you found, we might finally have enough evidence to take legal action. Daniel hesitated. Dr. Walsh's story was compelling, but trusting her meant abandoning any immediate attempt to rescue Samson. What if she was lying? What if this was simply a more sophisticated trap? I need proof, he said finally. Something to verify who you are. She nodded, unsurprised by his caution. Fair enough. She reached into her backpack and withdrew a weathered leather-bound notebook. This is my research journal from 1998-2001. It contains original notes on Samson's progress, including observations that would match behaviors you've witnessed. Daniel took the journal, flipping through pages dense with handwritten notes, diagrams, and occasional photographs paper-clipped to the margins. One photo in particular caught his eye. A younger Dr. Walsh standing beside a much healthier-looking Samson, her hand resting on his neck in a gesture of obvious affection. The horse's distinctive white chest patch was clearly visible. More convincing were the detailed notes on Samson's personality and behaviors, his preference for peppermints, which Daniel had discovered by accident one day, his habit of standing perfectly still when concentrating, which Daniel had observed repeatedly, and his tendency to use his body to physically guide humans when verbal communication failed, as he had done in the forest. "You really knew him," Daniel said softly, returning the journal. "Yes, he was special to all of us." Her voice caught slightly. "When I thought he'd been euthanized with the others, She broke off, composing herself. "Let's just say finding him alive has awakened hope I'd long abandoned." Daniel made his decision. "All right, I'll go with you. But I want your word that we'll come back for Samson as soon as possible." "You have it," she promised. "My colleagues and I have been developing extraction plans for years, just in case any of the subjects were ever located. We'll need to adapt for the specific security at this temporary facility, but we won't leave him there. Not again." They began making their way through the forest, Dr. Walsh leading with the confidence of someone experienced in wilderness navigation. As they walked, she explained more about Project Pegasus, how it had begun as a genuine scientific inquiry into animal cognition, how the initial results had exceeded even the researchers' most optimistic expectations, and how military interests had gradually corrupted its purpose. "The interfaces we developed were never meant to control," she explained. "They were designed for communication, to translate equine neurological patterns into something we could interpret, and eventually to translate our intentions back to them." "And it worked?" Daniel asked, fascinated despite his continuing worry for Samson. "Better than we could have imagined. By the end of the program, subjects like Samson could comprehend complex verbal instructions, recognize hundreds of symbols, and communicate their own thoughts and needs through a combination of trained signals and interface feedback." She smiled wistfully. Samson was particularly gifted with spatial reasoning and memory. He could recall routes he'd traveled only once, years earlier. That's probably how he knew about the cabin where you sheltered. He'd been there before? Most likely. The region was used for field testing in the program's later stages. After several hours of hiking, they emerged from the forest onto a gravel road where a nondescript SUV was parked. Unlike the government vehicles, this one was older, with mud spattering its sides and a dented fender. "My colleagues are about an hour from here," Dr. Walsh said as they climbed in. "They've set up a safe house where we can review your evidence and formulate a plan." As they drove, Daniel's thoughts turned back to Samson. Was he being treated well? Was he frightened? Did he understand that Daniel hadn't abandoned him? "He knows you're trying to help him," Dr. Walsh said, as if reading his thoughts. "Samson's capacity for understanding human motivation is extraordinary. It's one of the things that made him such a valuable research subject." "It's strange," Daniel admitted. "I've only known him for a few weeks, but I feel connected to him in a way I can't explain." "That's not unusual. The horses in the program often formed intense bonds with specific researchers. We theorized that their enhanced communication abilities allowed for deeper emotional connections." She glanced at him curiously. "Though it's remarkable he bonded with you so quickly, given his likely traumatic experiences after leaving the program." The safe house turned out to be a modest farmhouse on several acres of land, set back from the main road and screened by trees. As they pulled into the long driveway, Daniel noticed security cameras mounted discreetly among the branches and a reinforced gate that Dr. Walsh opened with a key card. 3 people were waiting on the porch as they arrived: an elderly man with a white beard, a middle-aged woman with bright red hair, and a younger man who looked to be in his early 30s. "This is Dr. James Harmon, our neurologist," Dr. Walsh introduced the older man. "Dr. Lisa Chen, behavioral psychologist, and Ethan Morris, our technology specialist and former military intelligence officer." They welcomed Daniel warmly, but with an undercurrent of urgency. Inside, the farmhouse had been converted into a combination living space and research facility, with computers, monitoring equipment, and walls covered in maps and photographs. "Is that Samson?" Daniel asked, pointing to a satellite image on one of the screens that showed a small compound with several buildings and a fenced perimeter. Ethan nodded. "They arrived with him about 3 hours ago. The facility is minimally staffed. 2 researchers, 4 security personnel, 1 veterinary technician. It's just a temporary holding location while they assess his condition and prepare for transport to their main research center in Nevada." "How much time do we have?" 48 hours at most, Dr. Harmon said. "They've requested specialized transport that won't arrive until then. So we have 2 days to plan a rescue," Daniel summarized. The 4 researchers exchanged glances. "It's not that simple," Dr. Chen said gently. "We need to consider the legal implications. If we can compile enough evidence to secure a court order—" "In 2 days?" Daniel interrupted. "That's impossible, and you know it." "There are other options," Ethan said quietly. "Less official channels." Dr. Walsh shot him a warning look. "Let's focus on the evidence first. Daniel, you mentioned documents you found. May I see them?" Daniel produced the papers and flash drive he'd recovered from the buried box. The team examined them with growing excitement, confirming their authenticity and filling in gaps in their own records. "This is it," Dr. Harmon said, his voice trembling with emotion. "The proof we've been looking for all these years. The original research protocols, unaltered by the military faction. This clearly shows our true objectives were communication, not control." "But will it be enough?" Daniel pressed. "To help Samson now?" The room fell silent. Finally, Dr. Walsh spoke. "Legally? No. Not in the time frame we have. The system moves too slowly and these people have too much influence. So we go with Ethan's less official channels," Daniel insisted. Dr. Walsh studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We may have no choice. But Daniel, you need to understand. This would make you complicit in what could be construed as theft of government property, possibly even espionage. Your life would never be the same." Daniel thought of Samson. His intelligent gaze, his gentle presence, his willingness to sacrifice himself so Daniel could escape. He thought of the horse standing patiently in auction, facing slaughter with dignity, and the trust he'd placed in Daniel during their short time together. "I understand," he said firmly, "and I don't care. Samson risked everything for me. I won't abandon him now." A new energy filled the room, purpose replacing hesitation. Ethan moved to a larger map of the compound, and they began to formulate a plan. Night had fallen by the time they finalized their plan. Ethan's military background proved invaluable as he identified security vulnerabilities in the temporary research facility, while Dr. Walsh provided crucial details about the likely interior layout based on standard protocols from the original Project Pegasus. "The key is timing," Ethan explained, pointing to a digital schematic displayed on his laptop. "Security rotates shifts at 2 a.m. There's a 10-minute window when coverage is minimal as they exchange information and responsibilities." "And the power system?" Daniel asked, studying the diagram. "Backup generator here." Ethan indicated a small structure behind the main building. "If we cut the main power, they'll switch to backup within 30 seconds. That gives us a brief window when the security systems will be recalibrating." Dr. Chen raised a concern. "What about Samson himself? Even if we get inside, we'll need his cooperation. He'll likely be sedated, possibly restrained." "I can handle that part," Dr. Walsh said. "I know the reversal agents for any sedatives they're likely using, and if he's alert enough to recognize me, I believe he'll remember the trust we once shared." Daniel nodded. "And I'll be there too. Between the 2 of us, I think we can gain his cooperation." Dr. Harmon, who had been quiet throughout much of the planning, finally spoke. "I want to be clear about what we're doing here. This isn't just about rescuing one horse, remarkable as he is. This is about exposing 2 decades of classified research that could fundamentally change our understanding of animal consciousness." His words hung in the air, weighty with implication. Daniel had been so focused on saving Samson that he hadn't fully processed the broader significance of their actions. If they succeeded, if they could bring both Samson and the evidence to light, it would challenge humanity's place in the natural order, our assumption of unique cognition, our justification for treating other species as lesser beings. "I understand," Daniel said quietly. "And I'm still in." They dispersed to prepare, gathering equipment and finalizing individual responsibilities. The plan would require precise coordination. Ethan would handle the power systems and external security. Dr. Chen would monitor communications and provide remote support. Dr. Harmon would prepare the transport vehicle and medical supplies, while Daniel and Dr. Walsh would enter the facility and retrieve Samson. As Daniel checked the gear Ethan had provided, dark clothing, a communication earpiece, a small bolt cutter, Dr. Walsh approached him. "You've formed a remarkable bond with Samson in a very short time," she observed. "It usually takes months, even years, for that level of trust to develop." Daniel paused in his preparations. Maybe he sensed I needed him as much as he needed me. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, unused to sharing personal details, but something about the intensity of their shared mission broke down his usual reserve. "My life hasn't exactly been on track lately. Failed marriage, struggling business, no real direction. When I saw Samson at that auction, something just clicked, like I recognized something in him that reflected what I was feeling." Dr. Walsh nodded. "Loneliness, displacement, the sense of being underestimated by the world around you." "Yeah," Daniel acknowledged, surprised by her perception. "Exactly that." Samson was always sensitive to emotional states. In the program, he demonstrated an uncanny ability to detect and respond to human feelings, sometimes before the humans themselves were fully aware of them. She smiled faintly. "Perhaps he recognized in you a kindred spirit." The observation lingered with Daniel as they finalized preparations and piled into 2 vehicles, Ethan and Dr. Chen in a modified utility van loaded with electronic equipment, Daniel and the 2 older researchers in Dr. Harmon's SUV with a small horse trailer attached. They drove in silence for the first 20 minutes, each lost in thought. As they turned onto a narrow Forest Service road that would bring them within hiking distance of the facility, Dr. Harmon spoke up from the driver's seat. "I've been thinking about why they didn't euthanize Samson along with the other subjects when the program shut down," he said. "It never made sense to me. They were so thorough about eliminating evidence." "Maybe someone in the program couldn't bring themselves to do it," Daniel suggested. "Had a change of heart." Dr. Walsh shook her head. "That's unlikely. The military faction was ruthlessly efficient." She turned to look at Daniel in the back seat. "I think Samson escaped." "Escaped? How?" "He's always been extraordinarily intelligent, even by Project Pegasus standards, and he had a particular talent for manipulating simple mechanisms, gate latches, door handles. We used to joke that no enclosure could hold him if he really wanted out." "So you think he engineered his own escape, then survived in the wild somehow until he was eventually captured and ended up at the auction?" Daniel asked, incredulous despite everything he knew about Samson's abilities. "It's certainly possible. Horses can survive quite well in appropriate natural environments, and Samson's enhanced problem-solving skills would give him advantages over ordinary feral horses." Dr. Harmon pulled the SUV to a stop in a small clearing. "We're here. The facility is approximately 2 miles through those trees. Ethan and Lisa should already be in position." They unloaded essential equipment, medical supplies, communication devices, and the specialized equipment Dr. Walsh would need to safely disconnect any monitoring systems attached to Samson. Dr. Harmon would remain with the vehicles, ready for a quick departure once they returned with the horse. The night was clear and cold, the forest canopy opening occasionally to reveal a sky brilliant with stars. Daniel and Dr. Walsh moved quietly through the underbrush, following the coordinates Ethan had provided. After about 40 minutes of careful progress, they reached the perimeter of the facility. It was smaller than Daniel had imagined. A main single-story building surrounded by a chain-link fence, a few outbuildings, and a gravel parking area where several vehicles were stationed. Floodlights illuminated the compound, creating pools of harsh brightness separated by deep shadows. "There," Dr. Walsh whispered, pointing to a low structure attached to the main building. "That's most likely where they're keeping him. Standard quarantine protocol would be to isolate a newly acquired subject for initial evaluation." Daniel nodded, scanning the area for guard movement. He spotted one security officer making a slow circuit of the perimeter fence and another stationed at the main entrance to the building. Their earpieces crackled softly. "Eagle in position," came Ethan's voice, using the call sign they'd established. "Preparing for power disruption on your signal." "Understood," Daniel replied quietly. "We're in position as well." They waited, tense and silent, for the guard to complete his circuit and disappear around the far side of the building. The moment he was out of sight, Daniel gave the signal. "Now." A moment later, the facility plunged into darkness. The floodlights died, leaving only the faint illumination of emergency strips marking doorways and exits. As predicted, there was immediate movement from the guards, voices calling out in confusion. Daniel and Dr. Walsh moved swiftly to the fence. Using the bolt cutters, Daniel created an opening large enough for them to slip through. They hugged the shadow of the building, making their way to the quarantine area while the security team was distracted by the power failure. Just as they reached the door, the backup generator kicked in. Lights flickered back to life, though dimmer than before. Dr. Walsh quickly punched a code into the keypad beside the door. Using old Project Pegasus access protocols, she explained at Daniel's questioning look. "If they've maintained any consistency in their systems..." The light on the keypad turned green, and the door unlocked with a soft click. "Lucky," Daniel murmured. "Not luck. Bureaucratic inertia. These people never change default systems unless absolutely necessary." They slipped inside, finding themselves in a sterile corridor with several doors leading off it. Most were labeled with room numbers, but one at the end bore the designation Containment A. Daniel and Dr. Walsh moved quickly toward it, alert for any personnel. The facility seemed eerily empty, clearly operating with minimal staff, as Ethan had predicted. The containment room was locked with another keypad. Dr. Walsh tried the same code, but this time received a red flash of denial. "Different protocol for high-security areas," she muttered. "Let me try something else." While she worked, Daniel kept watch on the corridor. His earpiece crackled again. "Movement at the main entrance," Ethan warned. "Two guards investigating the power fluctuation." "Hurry," Daniel urged softly. Dr. Walsh's fingers flew over the keypad, trying different combinations. Finally, one worked. The door released with a hiss of hydraulic pressure. They stepped into a large clinic-like room. In the center stood a reinforced stall structure, and within it, Samson. The horse was awake but clearly sedated, his movements sluggish, his head hanging low. Monitoring equipment surrounded him with sensors attached to various points on his body, focusing particularly on his head and neck where the neural interfaces were implanted. "Oh, Samson," Dr. Walsh breathed, her voice tight with emotion. "What have they done to you?" Despite his drugged state, the horse's head lifted at the sound of her voice. His good eye focused on her, then shifted to Daniel. A soft nickering sound emerged from his throat. "He recognizes us," Daniel said, moving quickly to the stall. "Can you clear these sensors?" Dr. Walsh was already examining the monitoring setup. "Yes, but we need to be careful. Some of these are connected directly to his neural implants. Removing them improperly could cause damage." "How long will it take?" 5 minutes, maybe less if..." The door to the corridor burst open. A man in a lab coat stood frozen in the doorway, clearly shocked to find intruders. For a split second, nobody moved. Then the man lunged for an alarm panel on the wall. Daniel reacted instinctively, tackling him before he could reach it. They crashed to the floor, grappling for control. The man was stronger than his scholarly appearance suggested, landing a solid blow to Daniel's ribs that left him gasping. "Keep working," Daniel shouted to Dr. Walsh as he struggled to restrain the researcher. "Get Samson ready." Dr. Walsh focused on her task, methodically disconnecting sensors while speaking soothingly to Samson, who was becoming increasingly agitated by the commotion. Daniel finally managed to subdue the researcher, using zip ties from their equipment to secure his hands. "Who else is in the building?" he demanded. The man glared at him silently. From elsewhere in the facility, an alarm began to blare. Someone had noticed the breach. "We need to move," Daniel urged, returning to Dr. Walsh. "How much longer?" "Almost done. The sedation is wearing off, but he's still unsteady. He might not be able to move quickly." Their earpieces crackled urgently. "Security team converging on your location," Ethan warned. "You have maybe 2 minutes before they seal the building." Dr. Walsh removed the final monitoring device, then opened the stall door. Samson stepped forward tentatively, his gait unsteady but improving with each step as his body processed the sedatives. "Come on, boy," Daniel encouraged, taking hold of a lead rope attached to Samson's halter. "We need to get out of here." The horse seemed to understand the urgency, rallying his strength to follow them toward the exit. But when they reached the corridor, they could hear footsteps approaching from the main entrance, the security team closing in. "Back door," Dr. Walsh decided, pointing in the opposite direction. "There should be an emergency exit at the end of the hall." They hurried as best they could, with Samson still recovering his coordination, the alarm continuing its deafening blare. The emergency exit was where Dr. Walsh had predicted, but it was secured with another keypad, this one requiring a physical key card in addition to a code. "We're trapped," Daniel realized, looking around desperately for another option. Dr. Walsh examined the door mechanism. "Not necessarily. The emergency protocols should—" Her explanation was cut short as Samson suddenly lunged forward, planting his front hooves against the door with tremendous force. The impact reverberated through the corridor, and to Daniel's astonishment, the emergency bar across the door bent under the pressure. A second powerful strike, and the door burst open, triggering another, louder alarm. "How did he know to do that?" Daniel gasped as they rushed through the damaged door into the cool night air. "He's been remembering," Dr. Walsh said, her voice filled with wonder despite their predicament. "All of it, the facility protocols, the emergency systems. He knew that door would give way under sufficient force because the safety mechanisms are designed to release under pressure in a genuine emergency." They ran toward the fence breach they'd created earlier, Samson moving with increasing steadiness as the effects of the sedatives continued to wear off. Behind them, shouts and the beams of flashlights indicated pursuit was organizing. "Hurry," Daniel urged as they reached the fence. "They're right behind us." Dr. Walsh slipped through first, followed by Daniel. Samson hesitated at the narrow opening, seemingly uncertain if he would fit. "You can make it," Daniel encouraged, his heart pounding as the security team's flashlights swept closer. "Please, Samson, trust me." The horse regarded him for a moment, then carefully maneuvered his body through the gap, the cut wire scraping against his sides but causing no serious injury. The moment he was clear, they plunged into the forest, away from the shouts and alarms of the compound. "Eagle, we have the package," Dr. Walsh reported through her earpiece. "Moving to extraction point now." "Understood," came Ethan's reply. "Be advised, they're deploying vehicles. You need to reach the ravine before they cut you off." Daniel looked at Dr. Walsh questioningly. "Half a mile ahead," she explained. "There's a steep ravine they can't cross in vehicles. If we can reach it, we'll have a clear path back to the rendezvous point." They pressed forward through the darkness, Samson now moving with remarkable sureness despite the difficult terrain. Behind them, the sound of engines revving indicated their pursuers had mobilized. The forest thinned, and moonlight revealed what lay ahead, a deep rocky ravine cutting across their path like a natural moat. On the far side, safety beckoned. On their side, the pursuing vehicles were closing in, their headlights visible through the trees. They had only moments to decide how to proceed, with freedom and capture hanging in precarious balance. The ravine stretched before them, a 15-foot gap with a 30-foot drop to a rocky stream bed below. Daniel's heart sank. In the moonlight, he could see that what had appeared on their maps as a manageable crossing point was far more treacherous in reality. "We can't make that jump," he said, voicing the obvious. Dr. Walsh was already scanning the edge. There must be a narrower point nearby. The sound of engines grew louder, headlights sweeping through the trees behind them. They had minutes at most before they were spotted. Sampson had been standing perfectly still, his head raised, ears pricked forward as he assessed the ravine. Suddenly, he nudged Daniel firmly toward the left, pushing with his strong neck. "I think he wants us to go that way," Daniel said, remembering how the horse had guided him in the forest before. Without hesitation, they followed Sampson as he picked his way along the edge of the ravine. The footing was treacherous, loose stones sliding beneath their feet, but the horse moved with surprising confidence despite his recent sedation. After about 100 yards, the ravine narrowed significantly. Still a challenging jump, but potentially manageable for humans. For Sampson, however, it remained too wide. "You two go ahead," Daniel decided quickly. "I'll stay with Sampson. Find another way." "No," Dr. Walsh replied firmly. "We're not separating." The decision was taken from them as flashlight beams appeared through the trees, accompanied by shouts. They'd been spotted. "Go," Daniel urged. "Take the evidence. Make sure it gets out. I'll keep Sampson safe somehow." Dr. Walsh looked torn, but the approach of their pursuers left little time for debate. She pressed a small thumb drive into Daniel's hand. "A copy of everything, in case we get separated." With that, she turned and made the jump across the narrowed ravine, landing safely on the other side. Daniel turned to Sampson, desperation rising. "I don't know how to get you across, buddy," he admitted. Sampson snorted and backed up several paces, positioning himself about 20 feet from the edge. Then, to Daniel's astonishment, the horse lowered his head and neck in a clear invitation for Daniel to mount. "You can't be serious," Daniel whispered. Sampson stamped impatiently, his meaning unmistakable. With the pursuers closing in, Daniel had no time to argue. He grabbed a handful of Sampson's mane and swung himself onto the horse's bare back, something he hadn't done since childhood on his grandfather's farm. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sampson gathered himself, muscles bunching powerfully beneath Daniel, and launched forward with explosive speed. Daniel gripped with his knees, leaning forward along the horse's neck as they accelerated toward the ravine edge. In the final stride before the jump, Daniel felt Sampson's body coil like a spring, channeling every ounce of strength into the leap. They were airborne, suspended for a heart-stopping moment above the rocky chasm. Daniel closed his eyes, certain they wouldn't make it. The impact of landing jolted through him, nearly unseating him. He opened his eyes to find them safely on the other side, Sampson's sides heaving with exertion, but his footing secure on the far bank. "My God," Dr. Walsh breathed from where she stood a few yards away. That was impossible. Daniel slid from Sampson's back on shaky legs. "He knew he could make it," he said, stroking the horse's neck in gratitude and awe. On the far side of the ravine, their pursuers had arrived, flashlights illuminating the scene. Shouts of frustration echoed across the gap as the security team realized their quarry had escaped. "They'll look for another crossing point," Dr. Walsh warned. "We need to keep moving." They pressed on through the forest, guided by GPS coordinates to the rendezvous point, where Dr. Harmon waited with the vehicles. Sampson moved easily now, apparently recovered from his exertion at the ravine, leading the way with confident strides. After 20 minutes of steady progress, they emerged from the trees to find Dr. Harmon waiting anxiously beside the SUV and trailer. "Thank God," he exclaimed, rushing forward to meet them. "When we heard the alarms—" "We made it," Dr. Walsh assured him. "Where are Ethan and Lisa?" "Already gone. They took a different route, heading for the secondary meeting point. We'll rendezvous with them tomorrow." He looked at Sampson with undisguised emotion. "I can't believe it's really him. After all these years." There was no time for reunions. They quickly loaded Sampson into the trailer, secured the doors, and climbed into the SUV. Dr. Harmon drove them away from the forest on back roads, avoiding main highways where checkpoints might have been established. Daniel sat in the back seat, exhaustion washing over him as the adrenaline of their escape faded. They'd done it, rescued Samson from captivity, retrieved crucial evidence about Project Pegasus. But what came next? As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Walsh turned from the front passenger seat. "We need to go dark for a while," she said, "at least until we can assess how far they're willing to go to recapture Samson and suppress the evidence." "Where will we go?" "I have a place," Dr. Harmon said. "A small farm in eastern Tennessee, registered under a different name. It's isolated, well off the grid. We can regroup there, plan our next steps." "And Samson?" Daniel asked. "Will he be safe?" "Safer than he's been in 20 years, Dr. Walsh assured him. "And with the proper equipment, we may be able to properly document his abilities, create irrefutable evidence of his cognitive capabilities." They drove through the night, switching vehicles at a predetermined location where an inconspicuous pickup truck with a different horse trailer waited. By dawn, they had crossed into Tennessee, the mountains providing both natural beauty and protective isolation. Dr. Harmon's farm turned out to be a modest homestead nestled in a secluded valley. A small house, a weathered barn, and about 20 acres of mixed pasture and woodland. No close neighbors, no passing traffic, just the murmur of a creek and birdsong greeting their arrival. They settled Samson in the barn, which proved to be better equipped than its exterior suggested. Modern stall fixtures, fresh bedding, and a well-stocked feed room indicated Dr. Harmon had prepared carefully for this possibility. "I've maintained this place for years," he admitted, as they ensured Samson was comfortable, "always hoping that someday we might find one of them alive." Daniel observed Samson exploring his new surroundings with obvious interest, inspecting the stall latch, examining the water bucket mechanism, even nudging open a small feed bin with surprising dexterity. "He's mapping escape routes," Dr. Walsh noted with a smile. "Old habits." "Can you blame him?" Daniel asked. "Not at all. That intelligence, that drive to understand his environment, it's what makes him so remarkable." They retreated to the house, where Dr. Harmon prepared a simple breakfast, while Dr. Walsh established secure communications with Ethan and Dr. Chen. Daniel, meanwhile, took his first real shower in days, the hot water washing away the grime and tension of their ordeal. When he emerged, Dr. Walsh was waiting with a medical kit. "Let me check those ribs," she insisted, gesturing to the bruising visible on his torso. That researcher landed a solid hit. As she taped his ribs, cracked but not broken, she determined, Daniel finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "What happens now? To Samson? To all of us?" Dr. Walsh considered before answering. "That depends partly on what you want, Daniel. You've taken enormous risks for a horse you've known only briefly. You've defied government agencies, become essentially a fugitive. Are you prepared to continue on this path?" The question gave him pause. His life before Samson seemed distant now, almost belonging to someone else. The struggling carpentry business, the empty apartment, the directionless days, none of it called to him anymore. "I want to help Samson," he said finally, "and I want to make sure what was done to him and the other horses in Project Pegasus doesn't stay buried. Beyond that," he shrugged, "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Fair enough," she nodded. "Our immediate goal is to document Samson's cognitive abilities thoroughly, create a body of evidence so compelling it can't be dismissed or suppressed. Then we take it public, through channels that can't be easily silenced." "And you think that will work? These people seem to have a lot of influence." "They do," she acknowledged. "But they're also vulnerable to public scrutiny. Black-budget projects like this one thrive in darkness. Expose them to enough light, and they wither." Dr. Harmon joined them, carrying mugs of steaming coffee. "There's also the matter of Samson's neural interfaces," he added. "They're proprietary technology, potentially decades ahead of what's publicly known. The military faction would be desperate to recover them, not just to suppress the knowledge, but to preserve their technological advantage." "Can they be removed?" Daniel asked. "Would that make him safer?" Dr. Walsh shook her head. "Not without risking severe neurological damage. They've been integrated into his brain structure for over 20 years. They're part of him now. The implications settled heavily over the room. As long as Samson carried those interfaces, he would be valuable and vulnerable. "We need allies," Dr. Harmon said after a moment. "People with enough influence to provide protection once we go public." "I've been thinking about that," Daniel said. Dr. Hayes, the vet who examined Samson initially, she noticed the anomalies in his blood work, the unusual scarring, and she has connections in veterinary research circles. Dr. Walsh considered this. "It's risky to widen our circle, but we will need scientific credibility to support our claims. If you trust her judgment." "I do," Daniel affirmed. She seemed genuinely concerned for Samson's welfare. "Then contact her, carefully. Use the secure communication protocols Ethan established." The day passed in a flurry of activity. Dr. Harmon set up monitoring equipment in the barn, preparing to document Samson's abilities. Dr. Walsh reviewed and organized the evidence they'd collected, including the documents Daniel had found buried near the cabin. Daniel, meanwhile, composed a carefully worded message to Dr. Hayes, revealing enough to pique her interest without exposing their location or full circumstances. As evening approached, Daniel returned to the barn to check on Samson. The horse greeted him with a soft nicker, seeming more relaxed in these new surroundings than Daniel had expected. "You're doing okay, aren't you?" Daniel murmured, stroking Samson's neck. "You've been through so much worse than this." Samson lowered his head, pressing his muzzle gently against Daniel's chest, in what felt remarkably like comfort. The gesture brought unexpected tears to Daniel's eyes. "I still can't quite believe it," he admitted quietly. "Everything Dr. Walsh told me about you, about what you can understand. It changes, well, everything." Samson raised his head, his good eye fixed on Daniel with that penetrating intelligence that had first captured his attention at the auction house. It was no longer possible to dismiss what he saw there as mere projection or wishful thinking. There was a mind behind that gaze. Different from a human's, certainly, but no less real, no less worthy of respect. "I won't let them take you back," Daniel promised, "whatever happens next." The horse blinked slowly, then deliberately raised his right front hoof and placed it over a marking scratched into the dirt of his stall floor. Daniel hadn't noticed it before, a rough but recognizable drawing of two figures, one clearly a horse, the other human, standing side by side. The message couldn't have been clearer if it had been spoken aloud. Together. Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Dr. Hayes, sent through the secure channel. "I believe you. Tell me where to meet. I can help." Outside the barn window, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the valley in hues of gold and purple. A new day was coming, bringing with it new challenges and uncertainties. But in this moment, with Samson's steady presence beside him and the first tentative alliance forming beyond their small group, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Dr. Hayes arrived at the farm 2 days later, having taken elaborate precautions to ensure she wasn't followed. She brought with her specialized veterinary equipment and, more importantly, connections to a network of ethical animal researchers who had long suspected the existence of classified cognitive enhancement programs. "The scientific community has whispered about Project Pegasus for years," she explained as they sat around Dr. Harmon's kitchen table. "There were rumors, publications that appeared briefly and then were retracted, researchers who suddenly changed fields or disappeared from academia entirely." "Did you suspect what Samson was when you first examined him?" Daniel asked. "Not specifically, but I knew something wasn't right. The surgical scars, the anomalous blood work, his unusual responsiveness." She shook her head. "I've worked with thousands of horses. None of them have ever looked at me the way Samson did, like he was evaluating me." In the days that followed, they established a rigorous protocol for documenting Samson's abilities. Dr. Hayes brought scientific rigor to their efforts, insisting on controlled conditions and multiple verification methods to ensure their evidence would withstand scrutiny. They began with basic cognitive assessments, memory tests, problem-solving challenges, symbol recognition, and progressed to more complex demonstrations of comprehension and communication. Samson participated with what seemed like enthusiasm, appearing to understand the importance of their work. "It's extraordinary," Dr. Hayes marveled after Samson successfully completed a sequential memory task that would challenge most humans. His working memory capacity exceeds anything documented in non-human species. More remarkable still was his apparent comprehension of abstract concepts. Using a series of symbols they developed together, Samson could express preferences, describe past events, and even engage in simple philosophical inquiries about his own experience. "He's asking if other horses think like him," Dr. Walsh translated one evening, her voice thick with emotion as she interpreted Samson's symbol selections. "He wants to know if he's alone." The question haunted Daniel that night. How isolating must it be for Samson, possessing a level of cognition that separated him from his own kind while still being fundamentally different from humans? No wonder he had formed such intense bonds with his human caregivers. They were his only bridge to connection. As their documentation progressed, Ethan and Dr. Chen arrived at the farm, bringing additional equipment and concerning news. "They're expanding the search," Ethan reported grimly. "Military intelligence, FBI. They're treating this as a matter of national security now." "Have they identified any of us?" Dr. Harmon asked. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. We need to accelerate our timeline for going public." They gathered that evening for a strategy session, the atmosphere tense with the weight of the decision before them. Once they revealed Samson's existence and abilities to the world, there would be no going back. "We need maximum impact," Ethan argued. "Multiple media outlets simultaneously, accompanied by a comprehensive data release. Everything we've documented, plus the historical Project Pegasus materials." "And what about Samson himself?" Daniel asked. "We can't just hide him forever, but a public appearance would be dangerous." "I've been thinking about that," Dr. Chen said. "What if we arranged a controlled demonstration for selected scientists and journalists? Somewhere secure but accessible, with enough witnesses that suppression becomes impossible." The discussion continued late into the night, weighing risks against necessities, personal safety against the larger truth they were fighting to reveal. By morning they had a plan, ambitious, dangerous, but potentially powerful enough to break through decades of secrecy. They would need 2 more weeks to complete their documentation and arrange the secure demonstration. 2 weeks during which they would remain vulnerable, each day increasing the risk of discovery. Those weeks passed in a blur of focused activity. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Harmon finalized their scientific documentation, creating a comprehensive case file on Samson's cognitive abilities. Dr. Chen worked with Ethan to establish secure communication channels with trusted journalists and researchers. Dr. Walsh concentrated on refining their communication system with Samson, ensuring he could demonstrate his abilities clearly under the pressure of public scrutiny. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself taking on an unexpected role, Samson's primary advocate and interpreter. The bond between them had deepened further, evolving into a partnership based on mutual trust and understanding. Daniel could often anticipate Samson's intentions before he expressed them, and Samson seemed similarly attuned to Daniel's emotional state. "It's remarkable," Dr. Walsh commented, observing them work together. "In the original program, it took months to establish this level of connection. You and Samson achieved it in weeks. Maybe we both just needed someone to believe in us," Daniel suggested. The night before their planned demonstration, Daniel sat with Samson in the barn, the horse contentedly munching hay while Daniel leaned against the stall door. "Tomorrow's the big day," he said quietly. "Are you ready?" Samson lifted his head, regarding Daniel with that now familiar intelligent gaze. He moved to the symbol board they'd installed in his stall and deliberately selected a sequence, "Change everything." "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "It will." He hesitated, then added, "Are you afraid?" Samson considered this, then selected, "Yes, necessary." Daniel nodded. "I feel the same way." The horse returned to his hay, but not before selecting one final symbol combination. "Trust you." Those two simple words carried a weight of responsibility that Daniel felt in his core. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would not let Sampson down. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Tennessee mountains. They had chosen a neutral location for the demonstration, a research facility at a small private university whose president had connections to Dr. Hayes. The venue offered both security and credibility, with the university's reputation lending weight to the proceedings. They transported Sampson in the pre-dawn hours, arriving before most of the campus was awake. Dr. Harmon had arranged for a controlled access area, a small auditorium with an attached space large enough for Sampson to move comfortably. Security protocols were strict, with each invited observer carefully vetted by Ethan's contacts. By mid-morning, their audience had gathered. A select group of scientists from various disciplines, 3 respected journalists, a legal expert specializing in government transparency, and a retired federal judge known for his integrity. 20 witnesses in all, each chosen for their credibility and independence. No recording devices, Ethan reminded them as they entered. We'll provide official documentation afterward. This is for your direct observation only. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as Dr. Walsh stepped forward to introduce their presentation. She provided a concise overview of Project Pegasus, its origins, objectives, and the ethical concerns that had ultimately split the research team. She explained the neural interfaces without delving into classified technical details, focusing instead on their function as communication tools rather than control mechanisms. Then came the moment they had all been preparing for. Daniel led Sampson into the demonstration area, the horse moving with dignity despite the unfamiliar surroundings and watching eyes. "This is Sampson," Daniel said simply. "He's 25 years old and he understands everything I'm saying right now." A murmur ran through the small audience. Daniel could read the skepticism on their faces, the natural scientific resistance to extraordinary claims. "We're going to demonstrate a series of cognitive abilities," he continued. "But first, I want to establish something fundamental." He turned to Sampson. "Sampson, these people need to understand that you're not performing tricks or responding to hidden cues. Can you show them that you're making independent choices?" Sampson considered the audience for a moment, then approached the large symbol board they had set up. With deliberate movements, he selected a sequence that was projected onto a screen for all to see. "I think, I choose, I am." The room fell silent. Whatever the observers had expected, trained behaviors, clever handler cues, this was clearly not it. The philosophical nature of the statement itself challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness. What followed was a carefully structured demonstration of Sampson's cognitive abilities, memory tasks, logical reasoning challenges, language comprehension tests. With each successful completion, the audience's skepticism visibly eroded, replaced by expressions of wonder and, in some cases, emotional response. Dr. Hayes led the scientific portion, explaining the significance of each demonstration in context of normal equine cognition. Dr. Harmon presented the neurological data they had gathered, showing how Sampson's brain activity differed from that of typical horses. Throughout it all, Sampson performed with remarkable composure, seemingly aware of the importance of the occasion. He worked through complex puzzles, responded to verbal cues in multiple languages, and most impressively, engaged in rudimentary dialogue through the symbol system. When asked by one of the scientists how he perceived humans, Sampson's response brought tears to several eyes. "Different minds, same heart." The demonstration concluded with Dr. Walsh presenting the historical documentation, the original Project Pegasus research, evidence of the military takeover, and the subsequent suppression of their findings. She distributed secure digital copies to each observer, ensuring the information could not be easily contained. "What you've witnessed today challenges our most basic assumptions about consciousness and cognition," she told them. "We're asking you to help ensure this truth reaches the public, not just for Sampson's sake, but for a fundamental reassessment of how we understand and treat other species." The university president, who had observed the proceedings with increasing amazement, stepped forward. "I've arranged for a secure press conference this afternoon. Those of you who wish to make public statements will have that opportunity." As the observers filed out, Many paused to regard Sampson with expressions of profound respect, a recognition that they had encountered something that would forever change their understanding of the world. Daniel remained with Sampson as the room emptied, stroking his neck and murmuring words of praise. "You were perfect," he said softly. "You showed them exactly who you are." Sampson leaned into his touch, seemingly exhausted but content. They had done it, created a moment of revelation that could not be easily dismissed or covered up. Whatever came next, the truth was now in the hands of people who would protect and propagate it. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. Ethan burst into the room, his face tight with alarm. "They're here," he said breathlessly. "Government vehicles just pulled up outside. At least a dozen agents, possibly more." Daniel's heart dropped. "How did they find us?" "Unknown, but they're moving fast. Campus security is trying to slow them down, but they won't hold for long." Dr. Walsh and the others rushed in, already gathering their essential materials. "We need to move Sampson," she said urgently. "The loading area behind the auditorium." "Too late," Ethan interrupted, checking a security feed on his phone. "They've surrounded the building. All exits are covered." A heavy silence fell over the group as the reality of their situation sank in. After everything they'd accomplished, the escape, the documentation, the successful demonstration, they were cornered. "What do we do?" Dr. Chen asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Before anyone could answer, the main doors to the auditorium swung open. A woman entered alone, her posture radiating authority despite her small stature. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, dressed in an impeccable suit, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Dr. Eleanor Walsh," she said, her voice carrying across the space. "It's been a long time." Dr. Walsh stepped forward, positioning herself protectively in front of Sampson. "Director Hartley, I wish I could say it's good to see you. You've caused quite a stir, Doctor. 20 years of classified research exposed in a single morning." Despite her words, the director's tone wasn't angry. It held something more complex, almost like reluctant admiration. "It was time for the truth," Dr. Walsh replied steadily. Director Hartley surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on Sampson and Daniel. "So this is ND-785. Still remarkable, I see." She approached slowly, respectfully maintaining her distance. "And you must be Daniel Morgan, the man who bought a horse at auction and ended up challenging national security protocols." Daniel straightened, keeping one hand on Sampson's neck. "I did what was right." "Perhaps you did," she acknowledged, surprising them all. "The question now is what happens next." The atmosphere in the room crackled with tension as they stood at the crossroads of revelation and suppression, the fate of Sampson and the truth he represented hanging in the balance. Director Hartley's unexpected arrival created a standoff no one had anticipated. The woman who had overseen the classified continuation of Project Pegasus now stood face to face with the horse who had escaped it and the people fighting to expose its truth. "Your observers have already left the campus," she informed them, pacing slowly along the edge of the demonstration area. "Most have been detained for debriefing. The digital materials you distributed are being confiscated. You can't contain this," Dr. Walsh said, her voice steady despite the setback. "Too many people know now. The university president, the journalists, all currently explaining to federal agents why they participated in an unauthorized disclosure of classified information," Director Hartley interrupted. "It's a serious offense, as I'm sure Dr. Harmon reminded you." Daniel felt Sampson tense beneath his hand. The horse was watching Director Hartley intently, ears forward, processing every word of the exchange. "What do you want?" Daniel asked directly. The director regarded him with a measured look. "Originally, to recover government property and prevent a security breach." She sighed, showing the first crack in her composed exterior. "But I'm not a fool, Dr. Walsh. You've altered the equation." "How so?" Dr. Walsh asked cautiously. "Your demonstration was quite thorough. The observers we detained, they're shaken. Fundamentally. One of your scientists, a neurobiologist from MIT, Told my agents he would go to prison before denying what he witnessed today. She shook her head slightly. That's not something easily dismissed or discredited. Hope flickered within Daniel. So you're not here to shut us down? I'm here to negotiate, Director Hartley clarified. The situation has evolved beyond simple containment. Dr. Walsh exchanged glances with her colleagues, a silent communication passing between them. What terms are you proposing? A compromise. The full details of the neural interface technology remain classified. That's non-negotiable. The military applications, the technical specifications, all of it stays secure. And in exchange, Dr. Harmon pressed, the existence of enhanced equine cognition becomes public. Your research on animal consciousness, the ethical implications, all of that can be released. Director Hartley turned her attention directly to Samson, and ND-785, Samson, remains free from government control. The offer hung in the air, unexpected and not entirely trusted. Daniel looked to Dr. Walsh, who appeared to be weighing every nuance of the proposal. Why would you agree to this? She finally asked. After 2 decades of suppression? Director Hartley was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its authoritative edge. Because I've been reading your original research, Eleanor. The papers you published before the military faction took over. Your work on cross-species communication, on expanding our understanding of consciousness beyond human parameters, it was visionary. You were part of the group that shut us down, Dr. Walsh reminded her. I was following orders, the director acknowledged. But I've had 20 years to observe the consequences of that decision. 20 years watching brilliant minds try to weaponize cognition rather than understand it. She gestured toward Samson. And clearly, we failed even at that. He escaped, found his way to someone who recognized his true value. Daniel felt a surprising kinship with the director in that moment. She, too, seemed to see Samson as more than an experiment or asset. How do we know we can trust this offer? Ethan asked, his military experience making him the most skeptical. You don't, Director Hartley admitted candidly. But consider the alternatives. We could attempt full suppression, detain all of you, contain Samson, discredit any accounts that emerge. But that approach has become increasingly untenable in the digital age. She turned to face Dr. Walsh directly. Or we can acknowledge that the paradigm has shifted and adapt accordingly. Samson moved then, stepping forward until he stood directly before Director Hartley. The woman held her ground, meeting his intelligent gaze without flinching. For a long moment, horse and human regarded each other in a silent assessment that transcended conventional understanding. Then, deliberately, Samson turned to the symbol board and selected a message. Truth cannot be divided. Director Hartley read the words, her composed expression finally giving way to visible emotion. Remarkable, she whispered. Truly remarkable. He's right, Daniel said quietly. The technical aspects, the ethical implications, they're all part of the same truth. You can't separate them. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. We need better terms, Director. The technology remains classified, yes, but the full scope of animal cognition research must be released. Not just our findings on enhanced horses, but the implications for all animal consciousness. And Samson needs legal protection, Daniel added firmly. Not just your word, but binding documentation that prevents any government entity from claiming ownership or control over him. Director Hartley considered these counter-proposals. The legal protection is possible. As for the research scope, there are legitimate national security concerns that must be addressed. Then address them, Dr. Harmon challenged. Redact what's truly sensitive, but don't bury the fundamental insights. The negotiation continued for hours, each point carefully debated, each concession precisely defined. As the discussion progressed, Daniel noticed a subtle shift in the dynamic, from adversarial to collaborative, as if they were all gradually recognizing they shared at least one common goal, acknowledging the truth of what Samson represented. By late afternoon, they had reached a framework agreement. Samson would be legally classified as an autonomous research partner rather than a subject, with explicit protections against government detention or experimentation. The original Project Pegasus research would be declassified in stages, beginning with the fundamental findings on animal cognition. A select committee of ethicists, scientists, and legal experts would oversee the process, with both Dr. Walsh and Director Hartley having input. "There's one more thing," Daniel said as they prepared to finalize the terms. "Sampson stays with me." Director Hartley raised an eyebrow. "You have no scientific background, Mr. Morgan. No research facilities." "I have his trust," Daniel replied simply, "and a commitment to his welfare that has nothing to do with what he can teach us or demonstrate for us." Sampson moved to stand beside Daniel, his position making his preference clear. After a moment's consideration, Director Hartley nodded. "Very well, but you'll need to make him available for approved research sessions. His insights are too valuable to be completely privatized." "Approved by whom?" Daniel asked. "A joint committee," Dr. Walsh suggested, "with representation from both government and independent scientists, and Sampson himself must have the right to decline participation in any session." The director hesitated, then agreed. "Unprecedented, but then, this entire situation is without precedent." As the final details were arranged, Daniel stepped outside with Sampson, needing a moment of quiet after the intensity of the negotiations. The campus had been cleared, with government vehicles creating a perimeter around the building. In the distance, the mountains stood unchanging against the afternoon sky. "We did it," Daniel murmured to Sampson, stroking his neck. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." Sampson nickered softly, leaning against Daniel in a gesture of companionship that needed no translation. Dr. Walsh joined them a few minutes later. "It's done," she reported. "Director Hartley is arranging for the legal documentation. We should have everything finalized within days." "Do you trust her?" Daniel asked. "Not entirely," Dr. Walsh admitted, "but I believe she recognizes that full suppression is no longer viable. And there was something in her interaction with Sampson, a recognition, perhaps, of what we've been arguing all along, that he deserves to be treated as a conscious being with inherent rights, not as property." Daniel nodded, watching as Sampson gazed toward the mountains with what seemed like longing. "What happens now, for all of us?" "We build something new," she said thoughtfully. "A framework for understanding animal consciousness that doesn't rely on anthropocentric measures. A way of relating to other species based on respect rather than dominance." She smiled faintly. "It's what we were trying to do 20 years ago, before fear and military objectives derailed the project." "And you think it will work this time?" "I think we have a better chance. The world has changed. People are more open to reconsidering humanity's relationship with other species." She gestured toward Sampson. "And we have living proof of what's possible." In the days that followed, the framework agreement solidified into a formal accord. True to her word, Director Hartley secured legal protection for Sampson, a unique classification that acknowledged his enhanced cognition and granted him rights never before extended to a non-human animal. The scientific community reacted with initial skepticism to the controlled release of Project Pegasus findings, but as more researchers gained access to Sampson and verified his abilities firsthand, acceptance grew. The implications extended far beyond horses, challenging fundamental assumptions about consciousness, cognition, and the moral consideration owed to other species. For Daniel, life transformed in ways he could never have imagined when he impulsively bid on a broken-down horse at that rural auction. He and Sampson settled on a small property adjacent to Dr. Walsh's new research center, close enough for regular participation in the ongoing studies, but with the privacy and peace they both valued. The property included a modest house for Daniel and a specially designed stable for Sampson, with features that accommodated his intelligence, a sophisticated symbol communication system, puzzles and cognitive enrichment activities, and a stable door he could open himself when he chose to come and go. 6 months after the university demonstration, Daniel sat on the porch of his new home, watching Sampson graze in the evening light. The horse moved with a vigor that belied his age, his coat now glossy, his once emaciated frame filled out with proper nutrition and care. The clouded eye remained, a permanent reminder of his difficult past, but it did little to hinder him. Dr. Walsh had visited earlier that day, bringing news of the latest developments. The government had declassified another portion of the Project Pegasus research, this time focusing on the ethical framework the original team had developed for working with cognitively enhanced animals. Public interest continued to grow, with news features, documentaries, and academic conferences exploring the implications of their discoveries. "You've started a revolution," she had told Daniel, not entirely in jest. "Samson started it," he had corrected her. "I just helped him finish it." Now, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Samson lifted his head from grazing and walked toward the porch, his movements deliberate and graceful. He stopped before Daniel, regarding him with that intelligent gaze that had first captured his attention at the auction house. Daniel reached out to stroke the white patch on Samson's chest, the marking that had helped identify him as ND785, but now signified something entirely different. A unique individual who had changed how humans saw their place in the world. "Who would have thought?" Daniel mused aloud. "That day at the auction, I just wanted to save you from slaughter. I had no idea what I was really saving." Samson nickered softly, then used his muzzle to nudge open the small symbol board they kept on the porch for casual communication. With deliberate movements, he selected a sequence that Daniel had seen many times before, but that never failed to move him. "You saved me. I changed you. Both free now." Daniel smiled, the truth of those simple symbols resonating deeply. He had rescued a horse and discovered something extraordinary, not just about Samson's enhanced intelligence, but about the potential for connection across the seeming chasm between species. And in that discovery, he had found purpose, community, and a sense of belonging that had eluded him for years. As darkness settled over the mountains, horse and human remained on the porch, sharing a companionable silence that needed no words or symbols to express what had become self-evident. Consciousness recognized consciousness, regardless of form. In that recognition lay the seeds of a profound transformation, for Samson, for Daniel, and perhaps in time, for humanity's understanding of its place in the greater web of sentient life. The old horse, bought on impulse to save him from slaughter, had indeed revealed something surprising, that the boundaries we draw between ourselves and other minds might be the greatest illusion of all.